Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Delighted, as always, to have with us my very special friend, Dr. Gene Getz. He's president of the Center for Church Renewal. He's also the editor of the Life Essential Bible, better known as the QR Code Bible. And we're going to do a couple of principles today, but he just returned from Israel. And if you've never been to Israel, well, let me tell you this, you need to go. It's just kind of one of those things that puts everything into perspective. How you doing, friend? Good to see you, Gene.
Oh, I'm doing really good. Well, it was a great trip. And you're right. Once you go, you never read the Bible the same way again. I mean, you can just experience it geographically and emotionally.
Yeah.
Really. In fact, it's interesting, the principle you're going to share right up front here, and when you get around to it, is not to preempt your agenda there, but
yeah.
I was just thinking as I was looking at this principle here, Principle 8 from Matthew, that you're going to pull up actually comes from the Sermon on the Mount, deals with the Beatitudes, and just a little over a week ago, I was standing on the Mount of Beatitudes and reading this passage.
Well, I was going to ask you, did you preach from some of the places that Jesus preached? And if you've never stood there on the Mount of Beatitudes, which is an incredible experience, but there you stood and you gave this lesson. It's got to be an incredible feeling.
Oh, it is. And I shared with them a story that happened a couple of years ago. Maybe I shared it with you, but I was standing there teaching the passage, and it was a beautiful day, and the flowers were on the hillside there. And I was reading, and Jesus said, behold the lilies of the field, don't spin. And I was referring to them. And then I read the passage which says, behold the birds of the air. And all of a sudden, I lost my audience. They were sitting there on the mountainside, and suddenly my back was to the Sea of Galilee, and at a distance, and their eyes went up. And all of a sudden, what they were looking at when I said, and behold the fowls of the air, it was like the Lord opened the cage and a bunch of birds flew right over my head. It was the Lord was right on cue. I've never had a more powerful visual aid.
Wow. Wow.
But anyway, it is an exciting experience. Of course, that was only one of the areas. One of my favorite places is to be up on Mount Carmel. Overlooking the Jezreel Valley and reconstructing, as we read from the Old Testament, where Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal, and to stand there and read that passage and to look at the rocks and the mountain and to look at the Jezreel Valley and to realize that down over the crest of that mountain, people would have been gathered, the children of Israel, and the prophets of Baal were doing all their incantations and cutting each other, and Elijah was kind of, well, he wasn't too kind in what he was saying when he says, well, why don't you call louder? Maybe he's gone to the bathroom or something.
Yeah.
By the way, that's subtle in the Hebrew text, but he was really laying it on to say that Baal was dead, he's not there, and then to step forward with, after all day long, they're going through all these cantations, cutting themselves, shouting, screaming. And he just said, okay, let's see who God is. And he just stepped forward with one statement and said, God, show them who is God, and kaboomo.
Wow.
Down comes the fire, destroys the offering, destroys the actual altar that he had actually constructed right there.
Yeah.
And lapped up the water around that been poured on that. It was, you try to recreate, you can't recreate it, but it's amazing to just stand there realizing that happened.
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
So it was
wow. Wow. Well, how often do you go? Do you take a group often?
Well, probably every couple of years. I'm not in the league with some of my brothers who've done, 60 or 70 trips. I've done about 7.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're back, but wow, what an experience. Well, let's get into it. Let's take you back now that it's fresh in your mind. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 5 and have you pick up. By the way, this is one of the principles inside the Life Essential Bible, and if you have a smartphone or a tablet, it has a QR code reader. You just kind of find the QR code here. This is on page 1288 or 1289, and you'll see a little QR code. You just run your device over that, it'll pick it up, and much like Gene is going to share with us now, but he actually shows up on a video and walks you through this passage. So take us through this and give us the scene since it's fresh on your mind.
Well, basically the principle that I came up with from reading the Mount of Beatitudes and putting it in the whole biblical perspective, which is, as you know, very important to do. If you're going to principalize, you can't take a text out of context or even a group of texts out of context. We've got to look at it in the light of the whole. And that's certainly true here, because what we read is, I've called this reflecting God's fullness. And the principle reads, to discover enduring spiritual fulfillment, we must be saved by grace through faith, and then demonstrate those qualities of life that reflect God's perfection. And when you look at the Beatitudes, which precedes that principle, the poor in spirit are blessed, those who mourn are blessed, the gentle are blessed, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, merciful are blessed, pure in heart are blessed, peacemakers are blessed, those who are persecuted for righteousness are blessed. You're looking, at a profile of perfection. And you and I know there is no way that we can be perfect in ourselves, that we can even come close to measuring up to the perfection of Jesus Christ, because this is a reflection of who Jesus really is. And so we have to understand in context here that Jesus folded into this passage is a salvation plan. And I think one of the neat things you could do is say, okay, let's allow Jesus to interpret this passage from another passage. Let's say a personal conversation with a religious leader named Nicodemus. And Nicodemus came to him by night. Now, if you look at the context here in this passage, it says that that Jesus began to teach, and it says he began to share the ministry of the kingdom, the mysteries of the kingdom, and he sat down with his disciples, and he shared with them this passage. Now, here comes Nicodemus, and he says to Jesus there in Jerusalem. Jesus, of course, is in Galilee here, but in Jerusalem, he comes by night, and he said, Rabbi, we know you are a teacher come from God, because no one can do the things you're doing unless God is with him. And boy, Jesus just looks him straight in the eye, I'm sure, and says, Nicodemus, unless you're born again, you can't even see the kingdom. Now, you put that together and superimpose it upon this story here, or his teachings here, you realize that part of being able, in fact, very significant part and foundation to being able to manifest these qualities in our lives is to be born again. So you have to look at the whole biblical story. And to be born again, Jesus goes on and explains that. In fact, he ends up that passage in a conversation with Nicodemus. Sometimes we cut this off. We don't realize it was said to Nicodemus when he says, Nicodemus, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And in essence, that's the capstone statement about what it means to be born again. And once we're born again, then we're able to reflect who Christ is. And that's why I worded this principle this way: to discover enduring spiritual fulfillment, we must be saved by grace through faith, and then demonstrate those qualities of life that reflect God's perfection. And that's what you see really here in the Beatitudes.
You can't go through those Beatitudes and totally understand them unless there is that born-again experience, because also in the long run it looked like a list that nobody could obtain.
Absolutely.
You know?
It's impossible.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because it closes with, and this is somewhat of a segue where we're going to go next, if you are blessed when they insult and persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you. Is he preparing them for the spiritual test there?
Well, I really believe it is. And by the way, in my ministry in Jordan, I had an opportunity to go from Israel into Jordan.
Wow.
And of course, there was friendship between those two countries in spite of the different religious persuasions and political persuasions. But there's a seminary in Amman, Jordan, wonderful, godly man who is the president. Happens to be a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary, spent, I think, about 8 years here, and then went back and he has built this structure with the help of his team. And there was a 5-year hiatus where it was unbelievably difficult. In fact, I saw the picture. Well, I saw the building, one of the buildings standing there, but I also saw a picture of one of the builders who actually, when working and laying concrete, purposely brought down that whole structure.
Oh boy!
And in fact, it's been quite a few years ago, and it's still a court case. And chances are, apart from a miracle, the thousands of dollars they lost in that deal. And he says, it was on purpose. And then he shared some other things that have happened to slow down that process. And I could just tell that it was a horrendous experience. I told my wife later, I said, honey, we have no idea, particularly in our culture, what it means to live in a context where you can really be persecuted. You've got to watch so carefully. Everything you say, everything you do, you're being watched by the government. You want to be above reproach. At the same time, you want to use the freedoms that God's given you. But anyway, I just think it's it relates to the point you're making.
All right, let me take a break. We'll come back. We'll get on to your next text out of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, dealing with spiritual tests with Dr. Gene Getz, coming up in just a few moments. Okay, we're back, and we're back with our good friend Dr. Gene Getz. He is the editor of this incredible resource called the Life Essential Bible, lebible.com. You need to check it out, or go over to Evangel and get one. I tell you what, this is a tremendous resource. I can't say enough about it. I've given them away. I've encouraged people to buy them. And for those of us who live busy schedules, sometimes I fall into bed at night and I feel the pressure, Gene, to be spiritual and read something. But I'm so tired from the day that I have to turn you on, and I watch you on my phone, and so you give me a good little Bible lesson to go to sleep on. And I can't tell you how many times I've been called to speak at the last moment, and I'll run my phone over one of your principles and pick it up and go preach it.
Well, I'm excited about that. That's one reason. That's one reason I wrote it, and it thrills me. And I assume at times when you bring me on at night and your head's on that pillow, your eyes begin to close.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're some of the greatest. Well, I'll just leave it at that. Anyway,
if I can help you go to sleep, that helps too.
There you go. lebible.com. Let me tell you, it really is a great resource. And I've had some folks who finally listen to us talk about it, go out and get one, and they just love it. And hey, tell us quickly, what is the Center of Church Renewal? What do you do there?
Well, basically, I brought that into existence years ago, even when I was a full-time pastor back in the late 70s. As a ministry just to pastors and Christian leaders to help churches become everything God intends them to be. And as we've progressed over the years, and as I passed the baton of leadership as a senior pastor, lo and behold, the thing that the door got opened was this Life Essential Study Bible. When they called me, when I passed my baton, almost same time to my successor here at what we now call Chase Oaks Church, West Fellowship Bible Church. We changed the name to Flow into the Community. But basically, they called and said, "Would you do this project, this Principles to Live By study Bible?" And I didn't realize what that was going to mean in my life, but 7 years later, here's that project. 500,000 words, 1,500 principles, the QR codes, videos. So what God has really demonstrated to me and to my team, basically, is that as long as God gives me strength, and my team agrees, because they love the project, the Bible, is that we're going to do everything we can to get the Bible into the hands, the Word of God into the hands of people all over the world. Mm-hmm. And for example, when I was in Amman, Jordan, there with the president of the seminary and his wife, Julia, lovely Jordanian girl, and every morning, without exception, she said, "I watch you on video. I listen to a video lesson." I mean, she's able to download it right there. In fact, we were sitting at the kitchen table in her home there in Amman, Jordan. I connected to Wi-Fi with my iPhone, and boom, there I was teaching. I mean, just that quickly. So when you realize how pervasive that is and how it can reach pastors, Christian leaders, laymen, literally all over the world, anywhere they have an internet connection. What that says is, Gene, at this stage of your life, this should be the focus of the Center for Church Renewal. And that opens the door to a lot of ministry in churches and helping churches, but that's our focus.
Well, folks, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. And again, lebible.com, or check it out at Evangel and get a copy of it. It's just, I can't say enough about it. I have to be careful because I've been accused of being his lead salesman, but that's how much I believe in it. All right, let's go to, in the New Testament, the Gospel of Mark, and you're dealing with something that kind of has to be dealt with, and maybe be in contrast to some of the doctrines that are out there today, that we are going to get tested. We're going to go through some tough times, painful, maybe even embarrassing times.
Right. And the principle, it's principle 26 from the book of Mark. There are times in our lives when we should expect to face spiritual tests that may be painful and even embarrassing. And I think that certainly is in harmony, that principle is in harmony with what happened to the Apostle Peter, and that's the context here. Because Jesus, coming to the end of his ministry and close to the crucifixion, says, "Every one of you guys are going to leave me." Mm-hmm. And Peter stands up and says, "No, if everybody else forsakes you, no, not I." And of course, you know what happened. They got to the garden, and let's be fair to Peter, he really tried, but he fell asleep. The Lord by the way, I was just in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Really? Yeah.
Right there, teaching these passages. Wow. I can just visualize. A week ago, I was standing there looking over at the wall, the eastern wall, and the Kidron Valley to which they had come. And I pointed out, I said, we don't know exactly where it was, but the disciples were over here, and then he takes Peter, James, and John a little further. They may have been here, I said, under this tree. Here we are here, and Jesus is praying, and they fall asleep, and Jesus goes back, and he addresses Peter in a unique way, calls him Simon. Mm. And see, Simon was his original name before he changed his name to Peter. Peter means rock. And any time, it seems, if you go back and check it out, when the Lord is a little bit distressed over Peter and his failures, he reverts back to his first name. And he did that. He said, Simon, Simon, couldn't you stay awake for 1 hour with me?
That's like your mother calling you by your first and middle name, isn't it?
It is. And it's even more than that, because what he is saying, where's my rock? It's beginning to crumble. contrasting Simon with Peter.
Yeah.
You know, you say you're strong. Where's that strength?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very embarrassing thing, obviously, for Peter. But it was a test, and it was a planned test in God's scheme of things, using his humanness. Sometimes hard to put that all together, but he's getting ready for even greater tests. You know, once Jesus goes back to heaven, and Peter becomes a spokesman for the apostles, and he's accused, he's thrown in prison, his life is threatened, just like James, the brother of John, was beheaded. Herod was out to take his life too. And ultimately, Peter was probably, they say, crucified upside down by Nero, at least precipitated by Nero. So in that sense, Jesus was preparing him for greater tests. And I believe that God does that in our lives. And I'd be cautious about judging other people. Mm-hmm. When I see something happening into their life, it's not up to me to come and say, well, I wonder what God's preparing you for.
Right.
See, I don't know. But in my own life, I can say, Lord, what are you preparing me for? And sometimes that's difficult to answer, except we just have to trust him. And that's where you're throwing back on Romans 8:28, you know, mm-hmm. that all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, to call according to his purpose. Even though we don't understand him, we have to take Job's approach in some cases, though he slay me, yet I'll trust him. And the thing is that just heard when I got back of a very good friend of mine whose wife was relatively young. They were ministering to their son-in-law who was dying of cancer. And lo and behold, she packed her husband's clothes to go to his funeral. And while they were there waiting for him to die, she got sick in 24 hours. She was with the Lord.
Wow.
Now, wow, I say, Lord, I don't understand. I called my pastor friend. I said, Bruce, what happened? He said, boy, this is when you have a lot of why questions.
Why questions.
You have a lot of why questions. And yet, God doesn't mind our why questions, but what it does bring us back to is we have to trust him, even though we don't understand.
There's some great hope in this story as it sets Peter up to become the spokesman of the church. So absolutely. Even after failure, there's redemption. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that applies no matter what our situation.
Right. Right. And what's interesting about this, that Jesus comes to him, scolds him because he's sleeping. He goes away, and he comes back, and they're still sleeping. He gets them twice on this thing.
He really does. And sometimes when I'm really sleepy, I get a little sympathetic. But you can tell that really was painful for Jesus. And some actually believe when he said, let this cup pass from me, mm-hmm. It was not just the cross, but it was the fact that every one of these men were going to forsake him. Mm-hmm. It was that painful to find them sleeping. Now, I think that's just part of what that was when he said, let this cup pass from me. Mm-hmm. But it was very, very painful for Jesus to be, weeping and crying as if he was dying, and to know that those who said they'd never leave him were over here 20, 30 yards sound asleep. Mm-hmm. That had to be painful too.
Well, the other lesson here is that we're going to be tested. It's how we trust God through the test that's what really matters.
Absolutely. That's the point. That's where we need to be sympathetic with other people.
Yeah. Gene, you're an inspiration and a delight. Thanks. I'm glad you're home. You look great, and best to you and your team and what you're doing. And let me just encourage you, go to lebible.com, check this resource out. What Gene just shared with us is on video. It's on a little 10-minute, 8, 9, 10-minute video. Pops up, and he has 1,500 of these from Genesis to Revelation. And it is, I think, one of the great resources of our day. Thank you, my friend. Look forward to having you back soon, and hear some more Israel stories.
Well, thank you very much. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.
You
Say
too.
Hi to your staff.
Okay, God bless you, pal. Talk to you soon. We'll be right back.